everybody, it's Natalie Bencivenga, and welcome to Facts Over Fear. I wanted to kick off Black History Month and talk a little bit about how Black history is really being erased under the Trump regime. And I wanted to touch on that in multiple ways, from what's going on with targeting journalists like Don Lemon. We're going to talk about exhibits that are being removed that focused on enslaved people. And we're also going to touch on the fact that the Kennedy Center is going to be closed for renovations indefinitely. What does this say about how and who is allowed to share history and under what context? So let's talk first about journalism. Former CNN journalist Don Lemon released following arrest over Minnesota protests, saying, "I will not be silenced." Him and 8 others have been charged in connection with an incident in which anti-ICE protesters disrupted a service at a Minnesota church on January 18th, according to a federal indictment unsealed on Friday. Lemon and others are charged with conspiracy against rights of religious freedom and an attempt to injure while exercising religious freedom in the 2-count indictment. Now, Attorney General Pam Bondi said on social media that Lemon, a Minnesota journalist, Georgia Fort, and 2 others were arrested at her direction. 3 more people had already been arrested in connection to the protest. Bondi also added last week that we do not tolerate attacks on places of worship. Lemon, an independent journalist, covered the protest and posted video on Instagram showing protesters yelling, and with interviewers with churchgoers. He said, "We're not part of the activists. We were here reporting on them." At a Friday court appearance in Los Angeles, a judge released Lemon on his own recognizance without bail. Here to discuss what this means as we're entering Black History Month, and we've already got 2, if not 4, Black journalists arrested in this moment, is Donald Earl Collins. He is working with Al Jazeera English as a contributing writer in the opinion section. Donald, thanks so much for taking time out to chat with me.
Well, thank you, Natalie. I appreciate it. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about your initial reaction when you read the story around Don Lemon, Georgia Fort, and others who were independent journalists reporting on what had happened at this church. Did you have any initial thoughts about this situation?
Well, to be honest, I thought it was kind of par for the course. Because we've been going down this sort of road to perdition for a while when it comes to journalism. Black journalists in general, who have faced harassment by law enforcement, who have faced harassment in general by vigilantes and other people while trying to cover the ongoing unrest that's occurring in our country. Whether you're talking about Occupy Wall Street and how some journalists might have gotten beaten up during that in 2011 and 2012, whether you're talking about the protest over the murder of Michael Brown in 2014 in Ferguson, how some journalists got tear gas, some journalists got shot with rubber bullets, some journalists were literally hauled off and arrested during that. During the protests in Minneapolis in 2020, after George Floyd. I mean, all of those sorts of things, right? So it's not surprising that in an administration that is, well, racist, and xenophobic, and anti pretty much anything regarding social justice would arrest journalists because they're covering an anti-ICE event in which the pastor of the church that's being protested against is working with ICE to have his own parishioners arrested and potentially detained and deported. What Don Lemon and Georgia Fort went through is kind of par for the course. I mean, this country has a history of this. Where you talk about the abolitionists of like Elijah Joy, Elijah, I hate when I forget names, but Lovejoy, Elijah Lovejoy, and how in the 1830s his printing press was and his printing shop was repeatedly attacked by vigilantes in support by state officials because he was writing for the abolition of slavery in the United States. He was eventually lynched by a mob in 1837. Or Ida B. Wells talking about lynching in Memphis in the South because two of her friends who owned a grocery store were lynched in 1892. And a group of folks, again supported by law enforcement, went into her printing press offices and destroyed it and basically told her never to come back because if she came back, they'd lynch her too. Right. So
Mm.
this country has a long history of ignoring the First Amendment right, freedom of the press. This is not news. Right. So yeah, I don't like it, but I do, as a historian, as someone who understands African American history and U.S. history more broadly, that in a country that allows these things to happen on a systemic level, that these things tend to happen. So that's sort of my overall reaction, and not just my initial one, but my general
Mhm.
reaction was like, well, this is par for the course, and this is why I know it's par for the course.
So when you hear people that might say something like, this is so un American, the way that they're behaving towards these journalists, this isn't who we are. And then you're saying through the lens of history, it actually does seem to be who we are. Can you just elaborate a little bit further on this disconnect? Because I think what I'm seeing is there are certain people in America, in white America, that are now sort of waking up, to the realization that there have been these horrors happening all around them for a very long time, but haven't been able to integrate that into their own psyche and understand that this violence is reaching them now, but it has always been in America.
I want to flip that a little bit,
Ooh,
Natalie,
do
and
it.
talk about really not so much the waking up.
Hmm.
But because if you haven't been awake enough to see all that's been happening, well, literally, whether it's in your lifetime or my lifetime, it's because you've had the privilege of being able to sort of ignore it, not just
Yeah.
sort of actually ignore it, right? Whether you're talking about everything from people being unhoused and how many people might be unhoused, to that the American dream is not a dream, but a nightmare for millions upon millions of workers, including white workers, by the way.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
if you think about those sorts of things, and yet we have this cadre of people, probably about a third of the population, maybe more, who are just been sort of going about their lives, taking care of their kids, buying homes, getting married, going to school, going to church, doing whatever, and going, oh, it's a shame that that's happened. I don't expect that to
Hmm.
happen in my community or my neighborhood. Why is that? Why are these things happening? Well, the reason that's possible is because you've had the privilege to ignore the fact that, everything from, racist violence that disproportionately impacts black folk, brown folk, indigenous folk, xenophobia that's directed mostly towards folks from Latin America, parts of, sub-Saharan Africa and parts of Asia,
Hmm.
ignore the homophobia and the transphobia and the other phobias toward people who are not straight, who are not quote unquote normal. Um, all those sorts of things. If you were in that norm of being sort of part of the white middle class, then you got to ignore a lot of stuff over the years. And now
Hmm.
here it is, and it's completely in your face. You can't possibly ignore it. Now you're saying, oh, I didn't know our country was like this. I don't think this is really our country. No, that's wrong. That's
Mm.
completely and utterly wrong. That's always been our country. Country that's built on genocide and systemic racism, sadly to say, but it's true, is the reason why you can have these things pop up over and over again.
Mhm.
And, for someone like me, not be surprised, but for someone who's been able to sort of see the police as friends, to see law enforcement and criminal justice system and all these other systems as something that's friendly toward them, you've had the privilege of them not looking at you the same way they look at folks who aren't white and middle class. And quite frankly, white male and middle class to go a
Mhm.
step further. So, yeah.
No, I think those are all wonderful points. If you're just joining me, I'm Natalie Bencivenga. I'm chatting with Donald Earl Collins. He is working with Al Jazeera English as a contributing writer in the opinion section. I want to shift gears a little bit because I've got a few other topics that are related, but I want to get your thoughts on. So, This article comes from Penn Capital Star. Governor Josh Shapiro joined Philadelphia Tuesday in suing the Trump administration over the removal of an exhibit at Independence National Historical Park that detailed George Washington's history with slavery. The exhibit, once at the site of Washington's house on Independence Mall, told the story of 9 people who were enslaved there. Philadelphia's mayor says the removal violated an agreement requiring the city to be notified before changes to parks exhibits. Can you talk a little bit about why you think they've decided to target this exhibit? And how does the removal of exhibits like this around enslavement affect the public's understanding of race and American history?
Okay. So, Natalie, I'm going to start with this, right? Um, I'm going to start around this. Any
Yeah.
kid, any adult who brings kids to any museum, any sort of historical landmark, whether it's George Washington's home while he was in Philadelphia during the first couple of years of his presidency,
Mhm.
not just for the last 6 years of the presidency, his first year and a half is actually in New York, actually. Now that I think about, among other places, right? That's me just confusing the stuff I actually already know. But anyway,
It's
you know,
okay.
when you go to these places, right, they present for you, try to give you a picture of who these people were, what life was like for them in real time often, and so on. So if you went to this site probably till about 3 weeks ago, you would have gotten a panel that not only identified this as George Washington's home during the last 5 or 6 years of his presidency, but have also identified the fact that him and his wife owned enslaved several hundred black people, several hundred people of African descent, right?
Mhm.
They brought them up as servants to help take care of them, make them drinks, host dinner parties, whole 9 yards of basically being taken care of, not only as president of the United States, but as slave-owning president of the United States. And the fact that that got removed a few weeks ago, um, is probably part of a larger effort of the Trump administration to deal with this issue known as DEI, what they think is this issue that is smothering the nation and littering it with mediocre people who shouldn't be in positions of authority and responsibility, who shouldn't be creatives, who shouldn't be intellectuals, and so on and so forth. Whether it's in higher education, in the case of Brown University or University of Virginia, trying to guarantee that diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, which is what DEI stands for, are removed, and that therefore folks who are not, well, let's be quite honest, people who are not white and
Mhm.
often male who get considered for employment, get considered for education, get their history considered. And so it's expanded from that to just sort of this idea that we should ban anything that shows the country as being anything other than this wonderful place for people to live, where the history of rich and powerful folk get told, and the folks who are marginalized by all that history. Uh, I don't want to use the word erase, but we're not going to talk about it. We're not going to display it. We don't want people to automatically see it. And so the idea is that so that the Johnnies and Janes who go to these historical sites, who go to these museums, who go to these murals, um, get, well, a whitewashed version of history that doesn't upset them, that doesn't have them question who the country really has been and really is and where it's going. That's sort of really what it is. But to be honest, it's really about making people ignorant and willfully so, right?
Mhm.
It's about, we want folks who don't really understand anything. They don't question anything. And if they don't question anything, maybe in a generation or two, if we have this kind of regime exist, they're not going to question why their government is doing exactly what it's been doing for the last year plus. Right. So I think that's part of a larger issue. It's more than just about Black history or even U.S. history,
Mhm.
but it's about what kind of country they want us to be after all. Not just the country
Mhm.
we've been, but the country they want us to be.
Let's talk a little bit about what you said around DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. What is it about that is so threatening, do you think, to not just this regime, but to the white supremacist structure as a whole?
I think it's as simple as this. When you have a power structure that or a system. Let's just make it sound more like a system like The Matrix, the movie The Matrix in
Yes.
1999. Sort of the system in which folks who are white basically are automatically assumed to be more intelligent, more diligent, harder workers, more able to be objective and see the forest through the trees, more analytical, and so on and so forth. Anyone who comes along, whether it's through DEI, just sheer dumb luck, to be in a position who is not white, who can, or not straight, or not white guy, right? And able to do that same amount, that same work, have that same level of credibility and creativity and so on. And then point at that, oftentimes be better than the white person at doing that job or getting those grades or getting a grant or a scholarship and so on. It means that, wow, our entire system is a lie, right?
Yeah.
And in point of fact, there are people who are writing about this. I've written about this on my Substack. I've written about this
Mhm.
for Al Jazeera. I know other people have written about this. And what DEI programs expose more than anything else is how much white mediocrity there is in education and in other spaces in this country. I'm not saying that all white people are mediocre, but that is hardly my argument. But being automatically granted to be more intelligent, better at a job, and better at getting an education, better at pretty much everything, right? Means that you don't have to prove yourself. And if you don't have to prove yourself, and someone else out there is constantly proving themselves, they're probably going to be better at that thing than you will ever be,
Mm. Mm.
right? You put someone through a gauntlet and make them suffer trauma and adversity, and they get through anyway. They're going to be better at that than the person who just was just handed to the keys to the king were just handed to. And so that ultimately what the fight is about the idea that there's this great middle of white mediocrity out there that's been exposed through these programs and through you know efforts in corporations, efforts in higher education, efforts in the public sphere in general. So yeah, I mean, it's really about that more than anything else, Natalie.
Yeah.
And that comes down to jealousy, narcissism, all these other
Mhm.
ugly human condition kinds of things that people have that, they don't want to deal with. And so instead of dealing with it, they attack the people who are doing well. How dare you? In so many words. So,
I appreciate that. If you're just joining me, I'm Natalie Bencivenga, and we are talking about Black History Month and the attempt from this regime to erase the contributions and the history of Black people. Now, Jan, you've left a couple of comments, but the one I'm going to share is the book Qualified by Sherry Dunn discusses this, what Donald is talking about. So I'm going to have to check that book out. So thank you. I always love it when people in the comments leave me book recommendations. I so appreciate that. If you have any other questions for myself, or for Donald Earl Collins, please pop them in the chat below. He is an Al Jazeera English contributing writer in the opinion section. Okay. So this kind of leads itself into the last topic of this evening for this conversation, but I would love to have you back. I'm really enjoying everything that you're sharing, and thank you so much for taking the time. You were talking about this idea around DEI and the ways in which I think it is so important that we hear different perspectives, different lived experiences, because it creates a better understanding of our world. It opens our minds to other people's lived experiences and teaches us empathy, right? Which can then help us build a better and more equitable future for everyone. And I think that relates really well to the idea of the arts and what it means to be in the arts and how the arts is supposedly and should be for all, right? And so President Donald Trump recently announced plans to close the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts for about 2 years, beginning this July 4th, which, whoo, that's just fascinating that he picked that date, saying extensive renovations are needed. A move that has shocked artists, staff, and patrons. I had read that the board was completely blindsided. They had no idea that he was going to do this. And it comes after a wave of cancellations and leadership changes since Trump took control of the institution. Now, critics argue that the decision, which was announced on social media and surprised, like I said, even board members, threatens the center's cultural role and raises questions about motives and artistic independence. Um, so, when we're looking at what's going on here, Donald, how might changes at major cultural institutions like the Kennedy Center reflect broader debates around whose voices and histories are centered in American arts and culture?
Natalie, that's an incredibly huge question.
I know.
I mean, like, yeah, I mean, this is the kind of question we could spend a whole hour just talking
We
about,
will
right?
have some like tea while we do this next time. Yes.
Yeah, but the truth is, it's just to try to just break it down a little bit, right? Um, you know, I mean, there are examples of regimes, and I don't mean when I say regime, I'm not necessarily thinking fascist regimes, or
Sure.
I mean like any kind of regime, whether you're talking about
Mhm.
Joseph Stalin during the Soviet era, whether you're talking about Mao Zedong in China during its Cultural Revolution in the 1950s or 60s, whether you're talking about the Perón family in Argentina in the 1940s and 50s. Um, there's just so much. There's so many times when governments take over and with a certain sort of bent, whether it's far left or far right, which usually ends up meeting in the middle, which is called totalitarianism, right?
Mhm.
There's this tendency to go, nope, we're going to try to take as much control of the arts as possible to make it reflect our values,
Mm.
not the
Mhm.
values that other people have, but just the values of the people who are in control. So we're going to, in this case, erasure is almost literal. I mean, Joseph Stalin had, Trotsky erased from pictures and artwork
Mhm.
while when they had their rift in the late 1920s, right? Just as one example, all nationalist sort of artwork was erased during the Cultural Revolution under Mao in the
Mm.
1950s and 60s. So I don't know if that's where Trump is going. I'm not going to suggest that that's the
Sure.
case, right? But I do think that he's petty, right? And we all know that
That
he's
we can
petty.
agree on.
Right. And because he's petty and because he knows all these big name artists have
Mhm.
repeatedly said, nope, I'm not playing at the Kennedy Center now. Cancel me. You know, you can take, matter of fact, you want your money back here. I'm going to give you your money back. I don't even want your money anymore. Right. That's what's
Mhm.
been happening over the last several months as he took over the board and fired key people and key leading positions at the Kennedy Center. By the way, I'm on LinkedIn a lot too, and I see advertisements for jobs at the Kennedy Center pretty much every week now. And I'm kind of like, well, no one wants to work here. Why should I want to work here if no one else wants to work here,
Right?
right? Exactly. So, I mean, for me, it's really, I think it's a cross between, the larger story of whether or not the values of this administration in terms of valuing things that are very sort of jingoistic, nationalistic, sort of white bread, you know, the, the Lee Greenwoods of the world. I'm proud to be an American kind of stuff is reflected there versus say, folks who might come from a different bent in terms of their artistry. Um, I, I think one of the controversies in the past year was that there was a group of folks there was a play, I think it was some sort of performance, I can't remember, it was an opera or whatever, where the main character was LGBTQIA, and they
Mhm.
decided to cancel them before they did their event. And that set off a wave of people canceling their subscriptions and their tickets and all kinds of other things there. So, there's that aspect of things, but I also think that this just comes down to Trump's personality and his refusal to look at what he's done and realize that he's the reason why the Kennedy Center is suffering as much as he is. And
Yeah.
so instead of dealing with that and going, let me back off and let it do what it's been doing for the last 60 some odd years. Let's instead close it down because I need to save face. I need not to get more embarrassed than I already am that
Mm.
that the people who refuse to play this institution are constantly showing me up. I think that's a significant part of what's happening as well. What it means long term, I don't know. Does that mean that the Metropolitan Museum of Modern Art changes and MoMA changes in New York? Does that mean Carnegie Museum of Art and History changes as a result? I don't know. I mean,
Right.
But there's been a habit of big institutions acquiescing before Trump ever does anything to them.
Yep.
So, there it's to be continued. Let's just put it that way.
Well, and
So,
that leads me into my final question for you tonight. I wish I had even more time because I'm absolutely enjoying this conversation and all of your incredible ideas and perspectives on these things. And I would love to have you back on. But my final thought for you is what role then should national cultural institutions play in elevating diverse voices? How do you balance artistic freedom with political leadership? Whose responsibility is this?
well, you have to understand, first of all, that all artistic expression, really all expression is political, right? Everything we do is political. We are political animals because we are social animals. And in order to communicate anything, it has a bent. No matter, I don't care how you can have an AI bot communicate that, right? This almost intelligent bot, not artificial, almost intelligent bot communicating whatever it needs to communicate. It's still going to come off with a political aspect to it. So really, the balance is about um, not about the balance is about letting people express themselves. We have a First Amendment right, freedom of expression, right? Last I checked, I mean, unless you just want to use the U.S.
Mm,
Constitution as toilet paper, then if that right really means anything, then it means these institutions have to let folks express themselves in ways that shine a light on what kind of people we are, what kind of society we have, what kind of world we are, right?
yeah.
And that means not going, well, if the only kinds of cultural expression we're going to allow are, for example, well, you know, so Israel struggled to maintain its nation state against Arab forces between 1940 and 1945 and 1982. Also must reflect on folks from Palestine who have been harassed and homes bulldozed, which, by the way, violate international law, and all kinds of other things have been happening in Gaza and the West Bank over the
Mhm.
past, several generations, 70, 80 years here we're talking about. So that kind of expression needs to be there too. If you're writing poetry that deals with um, law enforcement, that should be up there, say on the same plane as Dick Wolf's Law and Order, which basically glorifies law enforcement, right, in the criminal
Yeah.
justice system. So, you know, all expression, maybe not all expression. Some of the expression is distasteful. But guess what? Not everyone likes the same kind of music. Not everyone likes
Right.
Dua Lipa. Not everyone likes, The Weeknd. Not everybody likes, Louis Armstrong for that matter,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So it's not about what you like. It's about the ability of people to express where they are, where the world is, and to shine a light on the rest of the world as a whole. And if you eliminate that, you are in effect saying that we don't care about what all these other people think. We don't care about their expression. We don't care about their part of the larger
Mm,
politic that is the United
mm.
States, and that is the wider world.
Donald Earl Collins, thank you so much for joining me this evening in conversation. I really appreciate you and just learned so much just getting to listen to you talk on these topics. Will you come back and chat with me again?
Yeah,
I'm putting you
sure,
on
I
the
will.
spot.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, that wasn't a hard question to ask me, Natalie. That was pretty easy. Yeah, I'll come back.
That would be wonderful. If anybody wants to follow either of our Substacks, you can do so in the ticker above. Where else can people learn more about your work?
Um, there's several places. One is my Al Jazeera. There's actually a page for me and all my articles on Al Jazeera. They only do deal with, aspects of things I write about regarding U.S. and
Mhm.
the larger, wider world of Western civilization, I guess. But there's one place, aljazeera.net. Yeah, that's right. Aljazeera.net. That's one place. My Substack, of course, Fool's Gold Confessions from an Educated Fool, which most of the time is free. Sometimes I close it up for, paid subscribers because I do have a few. It
Mhm.
helps.
Mhm. I
um,
agree.
yeah. And I have a blog site that I've maintained since 2010 that has all my other writings going back much further than, say, 2017, most of them anyway. DonaldEarlCollins.com. So, I mean, it's hosted by WordPress, so you can go there. or you can just use your old Google machine and look up anything else you might want to learn. So, and I also have a book out. So, just quick plug, Spinning Sage's
Yeah.
Gold, allegories on the Western dominated present and the possible post-Western future that you can get through pretty much any site you want to go to. And that deals with a lot of these issues and more that we've talked about today. So,
I would love to have you back on so we can dig into some of the topics that you discuss in your new book as well. Thank you again so much for being in conversation with me. And for everyone that tuned in, if you didn't get to check out the full conversation, don't worry. I'm going to have it up on my Substack here shortly. So you'll be able to tune in and catch what you missed. And until next time, everyone, as always, please take care of yourselves and each other. Good night. Thanks again.
thank you.